everyone. Good evening or good morning, depending on your time zone. It's my great pleasure to introduce the distinguished editors of Concealing Caste, Passing, and Personhood in Dalit Literature. Professor K.Satyanarayana is a professor in the Department of Cultural Studies at the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. He has designed and taught a set of courses under the rubric of Dalit Studies and has published books and essays in the broad field of Dalit intellectual and literary history. He has co-edited 2 volumes of new Dalit writing, No Alphabet in Sight, and Steel Nibs Are Sprouting, and the critical anthologies Dalit Studies, Dalit Text, and most recently, Concealing Caste. At present, he is most interested in thinking about questions of dignity and equality in Indian literary cultures, intellectual traditions, and cultural practices. He teaches courses on cultural theory, Indian cultural history, and Dalit studies. And Professor Joel Lee is Associate Professor of Anthropology at Williams College, Massachusetts. He is the author of Deceptive Majority, Dalits, Hinduism, and Underground Religion, and one of the co-editors of Concealing Caste, Passing, and Personhood in Dalit Literature. He teaches courses on the anthropology of language, the census, and waste, as well as religion and caste in contemporary South Asia. So we will commence our discussion with remarks from S. Karthikeyan and G. Prasanna of the Ambedkar King Study Circle, who will provide valuable insights into this volume. Subsequently, we'll be privileged to hear responses from esteemed professors K. Satyanarayana and Professor Joel Lee. Following their contributions, we eagerly anticipate engaging in an open question and answer with the audience. Without delay, I invite Karthikeyan to start.
Thank you, Sindhana. Thank you very much. First and foremost, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to both Professors K. Satyanarayana and Joel Lee for their outstanding introduction to this remarkable book or the volume. And I warmly welcome both of you to AKSC's discussion series. For the benefit of those who have not yet had the chance to read this book, I would like to provide an overview of the contents. I would not like to dwell into it more, but just provide the contents, how this book is organized. Concealing Caste, Passing, and Personhood in Literature comprises 11 captivating short stories and 8 autobiographical narrations, and an illuminating introduction penned by the authors. These narratives traverse various Indian languages, including Hindi, Malayalam, Marathi, Tamil, and Telugu, while autobiographical accounts are presented both in English and other Indian languages. The editors have articulated 3 main primary aims for this volume. Let me begin by addressing the third aim, as it struck a chord with me during my reading. I found that integration of literature and social anthropology, which are often studied and taught separately in the universities, is a crucial aspect emphasized by the editor. Indeed, I immersed myself in the book. I discerned a seamless fusion between the short stories and the autobiographical narrations. Frankly, I do not find any difference between between the short stories and the autobiographical narrations. If it is not mentioned at short stories, when somebody read it, definitely they may feel that it is somebody's autobiographical narration, and the other way around also. As far as the author, the first aim of the editors is to analyze the operations and the effect of caste hierarchy, while their second aim is to open a new front for the mutual learning and comparative analysis in the ongoing dialogue between the African American and Dalit literature traditions in the emancipatory thought. The title itself, Concealing Caste, Passing, and Personhood in Dalit Literature, eloquently encompasses the intricate dynamics explored within the book. The concept of passing, commonly associated with concealing one's racial identity in the context of race, is ingeniously interwoven with the act of concealing one caste. And I'd like to quickly reflect before continuing. In the title itself, which mentioned the personhood, is taken by Ambedkar's very idea of developing one's human full potential, that personality, what Ambedkar calls as a personality. A society which is expected to give a full opportunity to someone to develop himself or herself or themselves in a fully natural given or God-given potentials in the area that they would like to thrive. Where the caste and race is definitely a big obstacle in letting an individual to achieve that personhood or the personality. That's where this personhood is taken. I could have spent good amount of time in how this book is titled itself, the concealing caste, passing, and personhood. I thought of many combinations why it is not caste, concealing, and personhood, or many other combinations. But the authors have an in-depth understanding of both race and caste, which it shows that how carefully this title is chosen. Engaging in a dialogue that combines both caste and race is a vital responsibility. Right. One that the editors have undertaken with utmost sincerity and diligence, which I feel while I was reading introduction. While caste and race share common features of exclusion, denial of opportunities, and exploitation, it is essential to recognize their distinctions. In a similar, in a, put to put it in a, simple way, the caste and race has similarities, but they are not same. And the authors have dealt it with a more sincere, and and I like to extend my sincere gratitude for them in dealing so. The narratives vividly portray the myriad emotions and states experienced when one's caste identity is exposed or questioned. These experiences encompass a spectrum of emotions, including fear, humiliation, shock, betrayal, and shame. And one of the short story itself is named as Dread. That is not only in stories, as I touched upon earlier, that in the autobiographical narration, or what a oppressed caste person experience, such as sniffing or when they are questioned about the caste. These are the feelings that is running in them. It can be fear or the humiliation or the shock or betrayal, and it is a combination of all of them. So these feelings, they serve as a poignant reflection of the lived experience of the oppressed. It is not only in the India, and it continues in the US, and authors has mentioned about in their introduction about the US, how in the Cisco case, the oppressed caste person caste is outed. The challenge of navigating the caste-related inquiries in the US further underscores the relevance and resonance of these narrations in real-life scenarios. The narratives eloquently depict how caste is conveyed through a complex interplay of linguistic, semantic, sartorial, behavior cues, from a rich semantic ensembles that shapes individual experience and interactions. It is not only through dialogue that somebody tries to snip somebody's caste or trying to know what someone's caste. It's not only in form of a language, but also in form of a behavior and the body language, how somebody's respond in a non-verbal, non-verbal ways also. The caste identity or sniffing out plays a very crucial role. What we have observed in many places also in our day-to-day conversation, where I would like to quickly touch upon a very personal interaction with one of my friend who happened to be a Muslim here, that I asked him that whenever he interacts with a person from a dominant caste, especially the Brahmins and others, and also the same conversation with the non-Brahmins, I asked him that, do you think your both verbal and non-verbal conversation, communication with both people were same? My friend was so honest and said, not so. And that is the fact. And that is what this book really talks about. I have more points to cover, which possibly I will cover in my reflections after the authors have speak. But but last but not the least, even we have two authors. I would like to really, I wondered how Professor Joel has translated some of the works. I have seen he has translated four short stories from Hindi to English and two autobiographical narration from Hindi to English. Um, it's it's a fantastic translation. Even when I read in one of the short stories, I cannot immediately, maybe Sandstrom or some short story where he mentioned how Savita felt that when he received a letter from her sister. Joel has translated the reservoir behind the eyelids filled. I do not know how it is written in Hindi because I don't know Hindi. Even I even I read in I cannot read in Hindi, but I think he has brought the uh, exact the feeling of the Savita to here. And I have many more to add, but last minute we have a surprise. We have a bonus from Prasanna because Prasanna, both I were reading, but Prasanna had a lot of office work. So he was not able to commit earlier that he would be able to give introduction, but he has joined. So thank you once again, professors and Sindhana, and looking forward very dynamic and lively conversation. And now, thank you. Over to Prasanna.
Thank you, Karthik. Professor Satya and Professor Joel, welcome to Ambedkar King Study Circle Talk Series. As Karthik mentioned, I'm a last minute entry into this talk just to share my comments on the introduction that I've read. I've read the first story as well. And in the past, I have read Baba Saheb's Waiting on Visa. So I get the idea of the book, that the theme of the book, right? What I'm going to do, I think, from the introduction that I read, there were many parts which caught my eye. They also gave me a very interesting and a new perspective at looking at things. Definitely, they have also raised a lot many questions in my mind, which I'll definitely share out at the end when we go through Q&A. So, uh, as Karthik mentioned, the book has two sets of sections, right? And the two sections are basically short stories and what we call as autobiographical collections. While the collection, before starting the collection, regarding the collection, what caught my eye was the very first passage in the introduction, wherein a story of Navaria is being explained and how his interaction with the tea vendor goes. And when they exchange their this interaction, how does that interaction go? And the way it has been put in the introduction is that just by seeing your coats and pants and your commanding presence, anyone would know that my caste was, maybe a perceived caste was Darbar. And then when the character also questions him back about his caste, the exchange is explained in this way, that in this way, the ritual of recognition, the dance of assertion and acknowledgement that inaugurates social interaction between strangers in caste society, and according to which both parties then calibrate their performances of deference and condescension, is finally accomplished, but not but only provisionally. So what this is telling us, that in Indian context, how from the very first interaction between strangers as well, this exchange and identification process goes, the scrutiny goes, and then it is mere performance after that. And that reference of performance also comes in the future sections of the introduction. Uh, what I wanted to also highlight was that the authors have made a very good distinction as to what includes in the book, right? That uh, not just short stories and autobiographies, not just translated from one single language, but considered all the languages like Marathi, Bengali, Tamil, Malayalam, and Telugu. It also talks about what the aims are. The three aims being analyzing the operations and effects of caste hierarchy, then trying to do this comparative study between the caste and race, how putting them together we can find out new insights. And the third was what Karthik has mentioned is the studies, the literary studies versus and perspective from social science, and how currently when these studies are done separately could also cause to lose some insights. And the authors have tried to bridge that gap in this by collecting these stories and highlighting them here. The authors have then done a good job in terms of setting up the context, I felt, where one needs to understand, like, there is a methodical process that you're going through to come about and arranging these stories as well. You have put in the context what the Dalit literature has been, what the theoretical frameworks that have been used. I think I can talk more about the frameworks that you have used. I would want to highlight more about the critical themes that you have shown among these stories and autobiographies. And relating to the first point, the first critical theme that comes out of the collection is about the virtues seen by many South Asians as inhering naturally in the high caste and are in fact performed. Brahminhood is an act, Kshatriyaness a runway show. Dalit characters who successfully simulate these and other Savarna statuses are careful observers and accomplished performers. The study of Savarna styles, savvier than many, a social science treatise, make possible an inventory of everyday acts and accountment that make up high caste persona. By identifying the scripts and stage props of the dominant and demonstrating how they can be used by anyone to simulate Savarna-ness, these adepts expose a fraudulent, the claims of privileged class, claims that continue to enjoy vast currency and not least in prestigious educational institutions like IITs. So this part was also very eye-catching in the sense that we are basically highlighting that the idea of Savarna-ness is more of an act. It can be performed given the resources and being in a right time, right place. I think anyone can perform these acts. And it's the idea that Savarnas do take, that this comes inherently, or the question of merit when that comes into picture. I think it has been very well put in this section. The second theme that I've also seen, the authors have talked about is of fear. And I think many a times there comes a question about Dalit assertion versus concealing this caste, right? And I have questions around that. How do you see that? I think overall, I'm excited to read more of the stories that follow, but very interesting, very eye-opening, new perspective giving introduction. And I thank you for that. I'll pass it to Sindhana.
Thanks. Thank you, Prasanna. Thank you very much. So now we will get into the response. We will get responses from both professors, Joel and Satya. So it's up to you who would like to go first. You can go and reflect quickly. Then we will open for the open discussion from the audience. And I too have some questions. I'll wait for the audience to ask. Then I will quickly.
Thank you so much, Karthik and Sindhana and Prasanna, for this very generous introduction. And I also want to thank you, Karthik, and the Ambedkar King Study Circle for the very kind invitation to take part in this conversation about our book. Satya and I were both very excited when you reached out to us, and I really appreciate the kind of space of discourse that the AKSC is creating, and it's really an honor and delight to be here. I thought maybe I'd start. I think we're doing sort of 10 minutes of comments each, and then going to discussion. That's how I understand it. So I thought I'd start with just a story about one of the things that got me thinking about the theme of our book quite early on. So between 2000 and 2006, I was working as a researcher for several different Dalit human rights organizations in North and South India. And in the course of that, I came to be friends with many activists, one of whom was an activist from Eastern Uttar Pradesh, who's doing really important kind of educational empowerment work in his home district. And for anonymity purposes, I'll call him Anand Kumar. So one time when I was visiting Anand in the small town in eastern UP where he lives, let's call it Husainabad, Anand told me about the time that his organization first got outside funding and was thus able to purchase a Jeep so that the program workers could go to their work from village to village to village, right? And Anand told me that in Husainabad at that time, almost nobody had a Jeep. Jeeps were very rare. And the fact that one of the first Jeeps to show up in the town now belonged to Anand's organization really bothered some of the, quote unquote, high caste, or in our book, we use terms like privileged caste or advantaged caste men in the area because they knew Anand to belong to a scheduled caste Chamar community. So Anand said to me, and I'm just going to quote him in Hindi and translate, जब मैं गाड़ी में चलता था तो हुसैनाबाद में जब गाड़ी खड़ा करता था तो वो लोग चाय पीकर मेरी गाड़ी पर फेंकते थे कूलर मेरी गाड़ी पर फेंकते थे कि जमा की गाड़ी है. When I used to go around in the Jeep and I'd park it here in Husainabad, some people who were drinking chai from clay cups would throw their cups at the Jeep. They would throw their cups at the Jeep saying, hey, the Chamar has a Jeep. Then, to my surprise, Anand began to laugh. I didn't understand why, because usually malicious displays of caste contempt aren't seen as funny. But he explained. Anand has a cousin who grew up in another district, not too far away, and who, as Anand puts it, looks like and carries himself like a baniya, right? A member of one of the castes associated with trade and shopkeeping. This cousin had moved to Husainabad, where he was largely unknown, and had established a small business making and selling pakoras and samosas and chai. Because the chai stall happened to be opposite a long distance, a bus stand on a long distance route, most of its customers were out-of-towners just passing through without the kind of networks of local knowledge that would enable them to know who the chai owner was. But even many locals didn't know that he was Chamar. And indeed, this was the source of Anand's laughter. This instance that Anand recalls of advantaged caste men throwing clay chai cups at his Jeep happened at this very chai stall. It was his cousin's chai that these men, entirely unaware, had just consumed. Let me quote Anand again. He said, "इसलिए हंसी आई कि देखिए हमारा आदमी बना रहा है, खिला रहा है उनको, और वो खा रहा है, पी रहा है, कोई दिक्कत नहीं है उनको. This is why I laughed. Look, our man is cooking and feeding them, and they're eating it and drinking it with no trouble at all. But the moment they realize that this is a Chamar shop, hansi meri swabhavik hai कि मैं उनकी छाती पर चलता हूं. My laughter is natural. I'm walking on their chests." So to me, this when Alan told me this story, it seemed to raise 1,000 questions, right? What does it mean to be walking on their chests? Questions about how does anyone know anyone else's caste? In what ways is caste the performance? It raises questions about the kind of profound falsehood of the idea that caste is innate or in the blood, as Prasanna was pointing out, and yet the serious consequences of exposing that falsehood by transgressing taboos that are based on it. Anand clearly enjoyed thinking about that moment when these Savarna men might realize that it's a Chamar's chai stall. But pragmatically speaking, what might happen to his cousin if that were to happen? Or alternatively, what if the men never found out? What manner of victory is this over the injustices of caste? So it struck me that stories like this of crossing the touchability line, transgressing the rules of caste, actually reveal a lot about the structure of oppression that gives rise to them. When Satya and I started talking about putting this book together, one of the things we noticed was that this kind of phenomenon where a Dalit character is assumed by others to belong to a more privileged caste, and everything that can follow from such an assumption, whether the person perceived that way sort of pursues it actively or passively, is a major theme that Dalit writers have explored in short stories, novels, autobiographies, plays across regions. But partly because this theme was emerging in multiple languages and often not available in translation, almost nothing had been written about this prominent theme. So we thought, what if we put these voices together? If we put side by side, all in English translation, narratives on this theme coming out of Kerala and Uttar Pradesh and Andhra Pradesh and West Bengal, what might these diverse accounts of crossing the touchability line collectively teach us? And Karthik and Prasanna have so thoroughly and richly introduced the sort of contents of the book that I'll skip the next bit that was about that. I'll just also point out that the narratives were composed between the 1930s. The bookends temporally are Ambedkar's essay "Waiting for a Visa," right, from the 1930s, and Yashika Dutt's book, which just things written in 2019. So you have it's also a kind of archive of Dalit literature, experience, and imagination covering 8 decades. So there are many avenues of discussion that I'm sure we'll pursue in these questions. I'll just, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing people's questions. But before passing it over to Satya and the discussion, I thought I'd just add a couple of quick notes since AKSC is a US-based group, kind of thinking about the US context. First is that while it's true that most of the stories, most of the narratives in the volume are really focused on, they're set in India and deal with caste as experienced and lived in India. But there are 2 essays in the latter part of the book, in the autobiographical section, that are written by US-based authors and that might be of particular interest to this group, as they do speak to a certain extent about caste in the US diasporic context. One is by Shailaja Payak, Professor Shailaja Payak, a historian at the University of Cincinnati and author of the excellent recent book, The Vulgarity of Caste. If you haven't read that one yet, it's another good one to check out. So in her essay, in addition to a really powerful firsthand account of how caste shaped her experience of the catastrophic Mumbai floods of 2017, she also shares some really eye-opening scenes from academic conferences in the US where people are trying to kind of tease out each other's caste in scholarly discussions. The other, of course, is by Yashika Dutt, the New York City-based journalist, whom I'm sure you know from her book Coming Out as Dalit. And Yashika, in her book, makes the point that her experience of having to hide caste in her childhood in boarding schools in Rajasthan and elsewhere in North India has a kind of counterpart or analog in what gets called passing in the US context, this clandestine crossing of the color line that structures American racial hierarchy. And this brings me to the second point, which is that we really hope that this volume will encourage people to read Dalit literature alongside African-American literature, in particularly proposing that the stories in our volume can be fruitfully compared with the really rich tradition of African-American writing on passing. In fact, in the introduction, we make some specific suggestions for pairings, stories that could be productively paired together. For example, Ayyappan's story, Madness, has some really striking structural parallelism with Langston Hughes' story from, I think, the 1930s or 40s, just simply called Passing. Likewise, Nella Larson's really wonderful 1929 novel of the same name, Passing, which I'm sure some of you know has been made recently into a Netflix film that's pretty faithful to the book and really worth seeing. That really has some striking, it sort of speaks to Ajay Navaria's stories and Om Prakash Valmiki's stories in the volume. So that's another pairing we suggest. So, of course, without ignoring or conflating differences between racial hierarchy and caste hierarchy, we think in the spirit of Ambedkar's dialogue with Du Bois, and also in the spirit of Isabel Wilkerson's recent book, that there's a great deal to gain from thinking through these two structures of oppression and the traditions of emancipatory thought in response to these structures together. So with that, let me pass it along to Professor Satyanarayana.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Joel. It's fantastic introduction, like reflection, how how the concealing of caste that is continuing among the South Asians who come to US, where it was a striking difference what Ambedkar writes in Waiting for Visa. Ambedkar Ambedkar wrote that about 5 years he's not he don't have any caste consciousness when he is in Europe and India. But now that is not the situation. So now the more and more South Asians coming because of the very fact of the rights won by the civil rights activist in 1965. Now people benefited by the struggles of African Americans who are able to come because of their social and economic advantage back in India because of caste. Now they practice caste and introduce the same feeling of the fear, shame, and dreadness in America. And we will hear more from you now. Let over to Professor Satya.
Yeah, so I thank Ambedkar King's Study Circle for this invitation. And also, I think setting up the discussion with the commentary, very detailed commentary by both Karthik and Prasanna. So I really thank Karthik for taking initiative and organizing this, and also Prasanna and Sindhana and other friends at AKSC, and we are very grateful for this kind of an opportunity to discuss this book. And of course, as you have told us, we'll take a short 5 to 7 minutes or so that we'll have time for longer discussion. And the other thing is that I'm kind of fully aware of the fact that we are not talking to an academic audience. So this is the point that Karthik repeatedly was making, that there are non-academic parts which are not very legible in the book. And we're really thinking of this as a more should be addressed to the ordinary, a general kind of a reader. So keeping that in mind, so maybe we could avoid more the kind of the academic nature of the conversation and focus more addressing the general reader and so on. Yeah, so I think quickly I will say a few things about this idea of what we started discussing using this term concealment used by Babura Bagal in 1963, caste concealment. And in fact, what happens is that the caste concealment is a kind of a limited way of describing this these practices at work. And in fact, it goes beyond the concealment. If you think of these three movements, concealment in 1963 to coming out in Ashika in 2019, and if you think of the Cisco case, caste outing. So there are different ways of how this problem kind of reappears, that you actually declare somebody's caste and say so and so is belonging to this group of people, so that there is a kind of discrimination, violence, and stigma in the Cisco case and so on. So there are kind of many ways in which this concept is useful to begin with, and to think of what we call the identitarian performance, and the structure of dehumanization, the connection between these two. In a way, I'm thinking, reflecting again by reading this book and so on, that there are occasions of mistaken identity, occasions of people drawn into playing different kinds of role and so on. And I think most kind of interestingly for me, I thought this whole problem comes up because there is no kind of acceptance of people as normal people. So Dalits as normal people are the marginalized as ordinary people. So I think this desire for a generic identity as normal people. So in fact, what we called concealment could actually be a desire for just to live normally. So we want to just live like anybody else, as the character going in a jeep and so on. So you would like to, but they throw a glass at the jeep and so on. So I think that's the kind of problem. One is that when the concealment has this idea that this is a practice of individuals, and you try to hide and you try to survive and so on. So it works at that level. But at the broader level, I think my larger point is that that there is also the structure of the caste system, and the structure of dehumanization. So if one wants to be a Dalit, or an upper caste, or a Kshatriya, or a Brahmin, or whatever, one thing is that the whole idea of performing and surviving, that is one part of the story. But the second part of is that the structure and its power and its violence, that is the other thing. You may think that I don't want to be X or Y, and I have no caste. You can declare that. But it is the larger society which actually decides where you are. They try to place you, they try to locate you. So this tussle between a kind of being located and also trying to come out of that, I think is the dynamic that we try to look at. It is a problem which is an everyday problem. In fact, many Dalits, many friends, after reading this volume, they've told us many stories of this kind, how they have actually dealt with this kind of a situation. In fact, the more tragic case I just want to highlight today is the Rohit Vemala's case. Recently, I don't know whether you have read it, whether it's reported in the US. Of course, I'm assuming all of you know that a student, PhD, doing research scholar at University of Hyderabad, committed suicide in 2016, and which was kind of described by the Ambedkar Students Association and the others in the country as the institutional murder of a Dalit student by the university authorities and also the right-wing government at the center. That's how they described it. So recently, Telangana police filed a closure report. So I think Rohit is relevant to us here in many contexts, because in the text also you have Yashika Dutt's extract where she talks about Rohit and her own coming out. In that context, she talks about it. And so the Rohit's case is, I think, very important because he is seen as preeminently a very assertive young Dalit scholar, and who tried to foreground his identity, foreground the Ambedkar ideas, and challenged Hindutva. I think that is an important contribution of Rohit. But the police report says now that Rohit committed suicide because he is not a Dalit. He is not a scheduled caste person, and he has taken a fake certificate, and he's not doing very well in his studies. So he's troubled by the idea that he would fail, and also his identity will be revealed, and then legal consequences will follow, and fearing that exposure, that he committed suicide. So, in fact, when the issue came up, it became a kind of a national issue and international issue in the Indian context, and also globally. The BJP government, through Smriti Irani and others, responded by saying that he is not a Dalit. So that because there is an SST atrocities case and there are punitive measures against one of the BJP MPs and also the Vice Chancellor. So they went on arguing that he is not a Dalit. Finally, legally they have declared that Rohit is not a Dalit. And there is a detailed story about how, in fact, Rohit built up his case as eminently as a Dalit through identifying through his own. He has a certificate, and he never used the certificate. He's a meritorious student, a very good student, bright student. He joined the university without, the reservation or anything. But he identified with that Ambedkarite group, and he tried to be with the community because he belongs to the scheduled caste community. But finally, what happens is that the subjective identification of yourself as Dalit, and if you accept that identity as political identity, then they try to declare that legally you are not Dalit. Legally, you are not Dalit, and that is the story. That's how it ends. So those are the consequences. This identitarian performances has like serious consequences, as serious as that you could be accused of your own death. You are a culprit your own death. There is no institutional culpability. There is no caste system. There is no the harassment from the other upper caste sections. It is simply your own fault that you want to falsify. You want to perform this identity, and therefore you died, and so on. So that's, I think, the important context that you can, the tragedy of this, enacting identity, performing identity, and of course, how the larger structures of both the caste system and the society, and also the state, try to kind of make it legible. So who is Rohit now? Rohit is somebody who pretended to be a Dalit and tried to cheat, and therefore he died. He died of his own, criminal kind of planning and so on. And that's how the story. And then the second point that I want to make is in the context of Dalit literature. So in the Dalit literature, so in fact, my own general project is in terms of how to make this interesting kind of intervention from the Dalit writers and critics in terms of thinking about society and issues of human dignity, how to make that visible and publicly debatable and so on. So as part of that, there are several volumes of Dalit writing we published with other friends, like I did with Joel and so on. So there is one problem in terms of, I think, the Dalit literary discussion is that the Dalit writers have raised that mostly Dalits have been presented in these stories as victims and as pitiable objects and as horizons in the Gandhian kind of discourse and so on. So as opposed to that, they started writing about Dalits who are creative, who are assertive, who have autonomy, you have thinking, and of course the claim to against history of struggle and creativity of Dalit people. So that is what I think they started writing about. They started bringing into the public domain. But of course, that looks like as though that they're victims versus the Ambedkarite assertive revolutionaries. I think that's the kind of a binary that is set up when the Dalit writing first arrived. So they're really criticizing the earlier writers and so on. And then what I think this volume brings out is that other than the victims and the revolutionaries, you also have many others who are trying to survive, who are trying to negotiate this problem, not through direct assertive situation, by through other subtle means and so on. Especially the AKSC example, are the number of Dalit people in the US now, how they're facing. And I think they were the other day, Karthik was saying, it's a real problem for us. It's not a book that you wrote. It's actually a real problem for us, how to survive day in and day out in the US in the social context, because every day we are asked this problem, how to deal with it and so on. So in that sense, that there are other subjectivities, there are other ways of dealing with this problem, and which are illuminated and illustrated in the stories in many ways, how people have dealt with it. So that is one part of the performance of identity, performance of selfhood, and all that. That's one part of the one important theme of these stories. And the second part is also in terms of what is the meaning of caste. that you could actually get out of this. Of course, there is structure, there is power, there is violence, and the identities are fixed. Identities are legible, and so on. If you cross, then there is violence and so on. But of course, there is also in these stories, you can see that caste is I think what we called a semiotic ensemble, a cluster of linguistic, territorial, comportmental, and other signs. And caste is in a way the semiotic evidence of caste in terms of skin color, build, gait, comportment, name, occupation, diet, dialect, political orientation, and other habits, and so on and so forth. So there is the fixed rigid meaning that enforced by the caste structure, but also the other ways in which the caste is also exposed, that it is very fluid, very fluid, very fluid and very loose, and it's kind of structured in particular ways, and this can be undermined, this can be challenged, and so on. And that is the other idea, and so on. Then, of course, the last point that I wanted to make is that in terms of how this discussion can be brought into a kind of global discussions. One is that the African American context, of course, the passing, which Joel has talked about, and you might be aware of that in the US. So that is one context where reading the caste concealment discussion in that context illuminate and offers insights and so on. Then the other important point is that I think we refer to Goffman's the idea of stigma. So the stigma, in fact, is kind of a global form of kind of marker, a marker that deals with discrimination, and that results in what I think we called forms of hierarchical differentiation. And forms of hierarchical differentiation not necessarily based on race, religion, and nation, but also bodily capacity, disfigurement, sexuality, or many other dimensions. So that way, the caste stigma, caste discrimination would also be thought of as part of a global hierarchy of differentiation and so on. So that is why I think that this is useful to think in that global context and other forms of stigma, so that we can actually pay attention to the specific context of Dalit stigma and all that. So the other point is that one of the consequences of this problem of fixing identity and then policing identity and then punishing those who cross those identities, that what we called the ungovernable effects or emotions like uh, 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 kind of love or intimacy and other kind of emotions. So those are also kind of governed by caste and policed by caste in a way that looks like the mutual affection outside the structure is not possible, and it also takes the dimension. Even if you become a rich and wealthy person and so on, and still it really haunts. And even if you go to the US and try to be a techie, but it haunts you the way that it haunted. So with this, I'll stop and I'll come back with more points later. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Satya. Thank you very much. I have many points to reflect on your presentation, but I'd like to definitely mention only one thing in the interest of the time, that caste is a structural issue which is supported by the state. That any form of exploitation or oppression, in our opinion, that cannot continue without the state support. And also the caste is a structural issue, which is also one of the stories. It is reflected when two people become friends because of their interest in the poetry. They were to get separated because of their caste, and the oppressed caste person, when he was chased from his home, that his another oppressed caste friend came and who rescued him, said, "Let us go and attack them." But the response from the person who was chased away, what? It was not his problem. it is Manu who thrashed me. That is what his response. He says it's a structural issue, but very unfortunately, there is a statue for Manu in the Indian High Court since 1989, and despite so many appeals, that eventually the Supreme Court allowed that statue to be continued in the Rajasthan High Court. So that is a situation that how the caste is manifest as a structural problem and the support of state. So let's get into the question answer. Once again, thank you, Professor Joel and Professor Satyanarayana. So whoever has questions, please raise your hand in the Zoom. While I'm seeing some hands to be raised, I'd like to quickly introduce about AKSC. AKSC, as I mentioned before, it's working for anyone who would like to develop his own full potential and achieve the personhood or the personality, and the society should give full opportunity to all the people, that caste, gender, or any race or religion or any other identity should not be hindrance. That's why we formed AKC, for the people to develop their full personhood or the personality, they develop their full potential. And AKC is a membership based organization. It's not like a we are working on the voluntary without taking any compensation, but it's a membership based organization. And how we differentiate the membership from the voluntary organization is mostly what we see some of the organization, those who are voluntary based, that they are working for the emancipation or the liberation of the others. But our cases, we had to work for the emancipation and liberation for ourselves, and of course, with the support of people from diverse anti-caste background. That's why AKC is made as a membership-based organization. And all the details of our membership and the programs is available in our website, akcusa.org. And there is no difference between the members and the non-members with respect to the programs. Our programs are public and open to all the people, all members. There are some member-based workshops and our annual general body, which is only for the members, but all other programs are open. So now I will stop here. So I have a question from Prasanna. Prasanna, please go ahead.
Thank you for that beautiful discussion, authors. One thing that I have found, I think Satya was just highlighting about the different frameworks that were used, right? In one framework, which I think is termed as subversive deconstruction, wherein we are seeing these passers as, and I think I want to quote that was put beautifully here. The passer in this framework is the bearer of the truth of the falsehood of race, whose maneuvers begin to open a path towards transcendence. So that is one approach wherein we are looking at these passers who are actually passing, appearing, concealing, but also going on the other side of these categories that have created. Whereas then there is the other approach in which we are arguing that this is nothing but a temporary phenomenon, right? Where we are saying racial recusal is a forlorn hope in a system where whiteness is the default, racelessness is never a possibility. So now these, in my opinion, are contradictory frameworks in which we are looking this concealment into. Now we at AKSC are trying to find this balance between verbalism and activism, right? And so as someone, as Karthik just mentioned at AKSC, we are trying to give that space to anyone and everyone who wants to fight for their own assertion, right? And so I'm a little bit confused as to how do we see these different stories and their nature, and how as activists do we take into considerations when you come across these kind of people. This has definitely given me a new perspective. But then from your viewpoints, from the stories that you have enlisted, how do you see one approaches the idea of concealment as an activist? I think Ajinkya, you want to ask you a question as well, and then maybe they can answer together.
So my question is, how do you see the new development of this global caste theory, caste as a global human rights concern? Do you think this theorization contributes to annihilation of caste in any way, or do you think it is a distraction from the menace of Brahmanism?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second one first. The first one, maybe we'll come back again. Maybe Joel would answer. How do you see global caste theory and so on? Yeah, it's an important initiative. Of course, with the what is called the global debate on caste started in the 90s and 2000 with Durban and also other global conferences in the USA. So it's an important kind of development in terms of globalizing the debate on caste and trying to see how this is a comparable form of discrimination, comparable form of human rights violation. Of course, back home in the Indian context, there are different ways in which people have responded. Many of the Dalit activists and some of the Dalit theorists also said, what is the use of this? In fact, one of the demands was recognize caste as equivalent to racial discrimination, and then UN should recognize it. So in a world where I think UN is totally not able to perform its duties, it's not a very powerful kind of a body. So what will happen even if UN says that caste is a comparable form of discrimination vis-a-vis racial discrimination? So what does it enable and so on? So it's a very limited way of thinking, and also thinking of this as a kind of human rights violation, as discrimination, also kind of makes it a very kind of diluted form of hierarchy, diluted form of oppression. But locally, because it is a nation state, its structures, its legal systems, which really doesn't allow people mobility and so on. But of course, at the end of the debate, I think what is important was, I think both are important. The global discussion, because you have to be able to say that the caste is not, very specific local. Nobody will understand the world. That argument also doesn't help because in the world, the way that it's going, you should also be able to put pressure through the global institutions, or more important, the global civil society, or something like AKSC. AKSC like forums could also put pressure on the Indian society, Indian state, and so on. So in the campaigns, for example, something happens in a small village. Now people mobilize not only the local support, but also support from the global civil societal organizations and other human rights organizations. So in that sense, you should also have some kind of a global theory of caste, global understanding of caste in relation to how it is also a form of hierarchy, a form of structural inequality comparable to others, but not reducible to racism or any other structural inequality. I think that is one of the points that we're making in this volume also, that there is a comparison possible. These are comparable forms of inequality and discrimination, but they are not the same. They work differently, and so on. So within the Indian context, you have a very, very different kind of a theorization, understanding in terms of how and what ways in which you fight this and all that. But the global strategy important. I think that's the point I would make, and then I ask Joel to respond.
Great, yeah, thanks. Prasanna, I'll try to take your question about the frameworks. Thank you for that. The idea that in that part of the introduction, we're thinking about ways that people have talked about and theorized passing in the US racial context. And, there's a kind of group of literary scholars mostly who were thinking about it in terms of subversive deconstruction. If you're crossing the color line, then you're deconstructing the color line, showing how these, artificial structures are in fact artificial, that the kind of theories of naturalization are all bogus because it can be performed, right? Whiteness can be performed or Savarnaness can be performed. So that's one very prominent way that it's been thought about. On the other hand, Henry Louis Gates comes out quite strongly on thinking about it more as a kind of passing as a kind of Faustian bargain, right? If because in the kind of legal regime, right, there's no racelessness, right? One has to be either this or that. And so to pass is to then enjoy the benefits of whiteness at the expense of everyone else. So that's that kind, and we were in kind of bringing these out, we want to, and we consider some other possibilities as well. We don't want to impose theories that have been developed here in the US onto the Indian or caste context, but just sort of think about how it's been thought about in this context, and see what might be useful and what might be helpful to think with and what might not be. And since you asked about, how those relate to how we might think about it in terms of the stories in the volume, you really see some of both and beyond in the stories, right? So there are two, like there's a point in Om Prakash Valmiki's story Andhar, or Sandstorm, where the main character, who has really completely severed ties with family and has a completely separate life from the kind of Dalit milieu of his childhood. And there's a point where Valmiki says, and in the office, when people would make casteist jokes, S. Lal would laugh louder than the other men, right? And so that's where you get the kind of, you can see the kind of Faustian bargain like reading of it there. On the other hand, in Jaiprakash Kardam's story No Bar, and in Suraj Pal Chauhan's story Raw Deal, there are these, it actually comes to the possibility of marriage across caste made possible by a certain amount of concealment. And it's left ambiguous at the end what's going to happen to the younger generation, but the possibility is opened up that this kind of subversive deconstruction could actually strike at the very root, as Ambedkar would have it, right, of the endogamy, right, of the caste structure. If it can lead to intercaste marriage, then maybe there is something rather subversive indeed going on. So those are just a couple of quick thoughts in response to your question.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Anu,
Yeah, Anu, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Anu Mandavili, and I want to thank the authors, Satyanarayana and Joel. Thank you so much for this presentation. And I'm particularly pleased to see Satyanarayana here, because he was my senior at university, and I have amazing memories of us, talking and organizing about various things. So I'm particularly pleased to see him here today. So I had two questions, and I must first confess that I have not read the book. So please forgive me if I'm talking about things that you already, highlighted in the book. My first question was about gender, as to how gender specifically plays into, a Dalit person's ability to practice passing, and how the reactions might be different from Savarnas or others in the Dalit community, even to folks who are practicing passing, depending on what their gender identity is. So I'd be curious to sort of understand that, because of course, different genders have different amount of power, in most societies. The second question I had was, some of the language, some of the terms that we were, using when we're talking about this in this discussion, words like passing or coming out, as Dalit, as in the title of Yashika, that's book, they really sort of took me to thinking about gender and sexuality studies, specifically all literature around LGBTQ identity and what passing or coming out means in that context. So I was wondering two things. First is sort of this notion as caste as performance, which you've talked about in this book, how that relates to the notion of gender as performance, right? Right from Judith Butler to so many other people have really sort of talked about this idea. And it definitely seems that, at least in terms of gender, people, activists, and people have actually been able to destabilize the notion of gender significantly. At least in the US, in the Bay Area, it definitely seems to me that it has been significantly addressed. Therefore, I was wondering, how far could we take this parallel of the idea of sort of identity as performance in terms of caste, and what kind of political strategy would it be? It seems like a very individualized choice, passing. But as a collective strategy, what might it look like? And how much can we borrow from gender and sexuality studies or LGBTQ studies or race studies in talking about passing as a political strategy for the in terms of caste as well? Thank you.
So yeah, so thank you, Anu, that you have actually combined a number of questions into one. So I'll try to answer parts of it, and I think Joel will also step in to answer some of these things. Yeah, so in terms of the text that we selected, as we stated in the introduction, uh, it's a kind of a random kind of selection from whatever is available. But we try to see that they're also, in some sense, representative of gender and other subcaste experiences and so on. But there are not too many texts available. I think whatever is available, we have put together here. And then maybe the scope for another kind of a volume. I think the more there are, of course, definitely examples of gender related narratives here. I think the most prominent one I would talk about is Ashka Dutt's. And Ashka Dutt is also more active now in the US with a new edition of her book, and also this touring with the book and so on. But also, I think the Ashka Dutt also, in a way, inaugurates a new movement of what is called the coming out. And the coming out has both these dimensions, as he kind of narrated in the book, that with the Rohit Vemula case in 2016, and when Rohit said that you really have to declare publicly you are a Dalit and you have to come out. And of course, he's kind of saying that the assertive Dalit self is the most important and valuable one, and so on. And Ashika Dutt says that she was inspired by that, and she decided to come out because till that time she was performing and acting, or if you like, passing as the Brahmin, the upper caste person, both in the hostels, in the college, and even in the US. Everywhere she has been kind of acting and performing. And suddenly, following Rohit's death, and she decided to come out. So her case is an important kind of an example of how being a girl student and about her kind of a skin color in the hostel, and there are many other detailed examples of that. So that would be one important kind of an experience of a Dalit woman. And of course, we also have one or two other stories. But also, this is also an important, this coming out. I don't know whether you followed, there is a recent discussion about the coming out because there is some Netflix series where Ashika, that story, it seems it was argued that made into a kind of a Netflix film. And so there is a section which deals with her life in Colombia and so on. But the LGBT Dalits, I think, have argued that the coming out is the first coined by them. It's an LGBT kind of a slogan. Why did she use it and so on? I think other than the controversy, the most interesting point is that she is also kind of referring to this context of coming out and the solidarities between the LGBT groups and struggles around sexuality and the Dalit. I think there is a possibility, but we couldn't find really stories dealing with sexuality or with the queer identity, politics, and so on. Maybe in future, definitely we will have those kinds of stories. Yeah. So with this, I think the identity as performance passing, what are the possibilities, limits, and so on. Maybe I'll ask Joel to respond to that.
Yeah, thanks, Anu, for that question. And let me try to address the first part of your question, or your first question about how gender plays into the capacity to do any kind of identitarian play or concealment or passing in the first place. There's certainly very clear ways in which patriarchy sort of delimits the space for women to do this kind of experimentation. I mean, one of the things I think of is and Jai Prakash Kardam writes about this in his autobiographical essay. One of the major spaces where this starts is, getting a place to rent, right? It's about the rental market or the housing market, right? And so insofar as the expectation is that insofar as the rental market, getting a lease and so on is insofar as kind of the patriarchal structure of society encourages men to do that more than women, that's one of the major areas in which, right, caste concealment becomes kind of compulsory if you want to kind of as Satya was saying, kind of live a quote unquote normal middle class life, right? When there's so much caste discrimination in the housing market. But one area where that's not addressed in our stories, but is clearly, if you're looking at the kind of practice of caste concealment in everyday life, right? Domestic labor is this vast domain. And the Medakole case that you may remember from 2017, for a few days, it was sort of constantly in the news. A meteorologist in Pune who accused her domestic cook of caste concealment and filed a police case against her, actually. And then the cook filed a counter case saying, like, this woman actually came in and barged into my home and assaulted me. And caste associations and political parties and all kinds of groups drew battle lines. And because the cook was from the Maratha community in this case, and it was Maharashtra, so she actually got a lot of support. And ultimately, the Brahmin meteorologist withdrew her case. But that case really brought out into the open this kind of rather large domain of everyday life where, again, caste concealment is sort of made compulsory if you're a Dalit woman and you're trying to have a decent wage in domestic work, since it's highly graded by task, right? If you're doing a safai, if you're doing cleaning, the wage is about half of what it is if you're working in the kitchen or cooking. But for many employers, like this Kole who lost the case, right? They would not have a Dalit woman in the kitchen. And so anyway, so that's I mean, you asked the question of, in what ways does the kind of gender structure of gender norms in society shape the kind of field for this kind of practice? And that's, I think, is a major one. And yeah, I mean, I think on this end, on the kind of question of sexuality, I think, we're hoping this book is just the first of many. Like more and more stories will come to light, ones that we don't know about yet in languages we haven't perhaps been able to look at, but also new stories coming out. And so I hope this will lead to further volumes that other people will take up that address the intersection of, the questions we're raising with sexuality and so on.
Can I add one more thing? This is Anu. I was just remembering this recent case, which I'm sure all of us have read about, which is the case of the food delivery persons who work for Zomato. there were several different things that happened. Initially, the CEO of Zomato said when someone complained that the person who delivered food to them was of a caste that they did not, like. Then the CEO said, "No, I'm not gonna humor those kind of comments, and you get the food or not from Zomato, whatever." Then more recently, there was this move, right, to designate the food in terms of a green or a veg or non-veg, whatever it was. I mean, there have been several different things that have happened. And I kept thinking, these are some of the poorest paid jobs in India, the job of the delivery vendor food, because it's it really pays nothing. So capitalism, I think, will sort of force these CEOs and other people in power not to go with this thing about identifying people's caste, because the only people who will be working for these kind of very bad jobs are the people who are the most underprivileged, often from underprivileged castes. Therefore, I was just wondering about that interplay, right? Like the demand for absolutely bottom, very low paid labor, and then need by capitalism for this kind of labor, in especially these delivery jobs, whether food or anything else, and how that's going to work out. And I was wondering if you all came across some stories. I'm talking about the authors in terms of what discussions are taking place in that particular, in terms of labor and capitalism.
Just a quick thought in response to that would be Suraj Bhartia, who's not in this collection, but a wonderful writer in Hindi. It was also involved with the Dalit Lekhak Sangh in North India. Has a story that deals with labor in McDonald's. That's really about food and labor and caste in McDonald's corporate structure at lower and middle levels, and it centers on kind of interviews and what goes on in the interviews for management, and it really gets into precisely what you're asking, this kind of intersection of labor and food service that's highly, stratified by class, and how caste sort of works there, even when it's disavowed. I don't remember the name of the story offhand, but I'm sure it's in one of his collections.
Yeah, okay. So, but Satya and Joel, when with respect to Anu's point about the gender and the caste, I think we have there is a story called the Parable of Lost Daughter, which is it is really heartbreaking. How that story is about how yeah, Dalit girl would like to be friends with has a friend from a Brahmin family, and how she moves with them, and how they respond to her. And I think that is that's a depiction of reality, what I understood, because I have observed some of the girls told me when they were in young age, especially when the Brahmins were friends, and these kids also started picking up this Brahminical way of speaking, especially in the same story, that where the Dalit girl also adds H at the end of every sentence. I think the Brahmins speak Telugu in a different way. That's what I understood. This is same in Tamil also. In Tamil Nadu, the Tamil Brahmin speaks Tamil in a different way. Then I understood from my friend that the Marathi Brahmins speak Marathi in a different way. And this girl tried to mimic them, but eventually understood that their home, even they are not um, economically well off, but their home gives her a more freedom. And when she understood that, she decided to come out with her own identity, that she refused to remove the pottu, that leaving the home, and that's that. And another the autobiographical narration, I think, is a doubly crushed. That is also very very touching. And eventually, when caste makes some deep wounds in the hearts of young people, especially the girls, I don't think so how long it will take for them to come out of it. So even somebody really started trying, they are completely crushed. That is what my understanding when the story, especially about the girls or the autobiographical narration. And another point, I do not know whether this book can cover or not. We should have another collection or another response. How actually the dominant caste people see this caste issue? Because they are so comfortably ignoring and normalizing. That's what I read in Why the Black Kids Are Sitting Together, written by Tantum. And in the school, that when the kids were talking, it's all about children. When the kids were talking, when a black kid or the white or the Latin American or other non-white person were asked, "What are you?" They used to say, "Okay, I'm a Mexican, I'm black, I'm I'm like Native American and all." But when the white children were asked the same question, their response was they were normal. That is how the book starts, and it takes together. And also with respect to the class in the stories also and the autobiographical narration also, even the people working in the same office, they were not treated equally. If people working in the same office not able to rent from the same place. That's happened to a bank employee in the real story. And also it's the same happened for Ambedkar. Ambedkar, that was an interesting the waiting for the visa when he's trying to find a shelter to work for a Baroda king. I think as far as I remember, that is the first time Ambedkar declare himself openly is a Hindu. And he did not told the Parsi that he is untouchable. He told he's an Hindu and gave a advice to the Parsi, you let me in as an Hindu and you will make some money. That's the deal that Ambedkar tries to make. So where's the class question comes? It is true that no form of oppression can be broken without breaking all form of oppressions. But when some things are within our limit to address, that bringing some other issue of gender and the class in sometimes diluting the vulgarity of the caste, that we have to be really careful in building the united front against all oppressions. What we in AKSC call it's a unique struggle within the united struggle.
Karthik, I just want to add one point.
Yeah, please.
No, in terms of the gender dimension, we should also think in terms of the madness, the Ayyappan story, where the upper caste woman's behavior in relation to the Dalit man, how he is silenced. And of course, you have the famous classic story from the poison bed, the story of my Sanskrit by Kumud Pavde, where there is the story of a Dalit girl, how surname makes all the difference. Yeah.
Which is the second one, Satya? I got the first one.
The story of my Sanskrit, the story is referred to in the introduction, but it's not there. We didn't include that. It was from the Poison Bread. Poison Bread, very important story of a Dalit girl. How when she changes her surname, she gets the job. Until that time, she never got the job.
Yeah. And we have a testimony also, Satya, in AKC. One testimony was when one of the non-Brahmin girl, grew up in West Mamlam, which is a very Brahminical area. The Brahmin girls came and asked her, "Do you eat fish?" But accidentally, my friend will not eat fish, but she's a non-vegetarian. So then they accepted into their group. And we have another testimony which took place in the East Coast, where um, one of the person who has given testimony, his daughter took pepperoni pizza in school in New Jersey or Massachusetts, somewhere in the East Coast. And all the other Indian girls said, Indians don't eat pepperoni pizza because Indians don't eat beef and pork. And that girl almost broken and came home and cried to my friend. And this is how it is deep rooted. And my real worry is how long it will take for these children to come out of all this and overcome all this. Then you develop your personhood. That is yeah, this book mostly covered the adult experience, but I think we should include the impact in the kids also. And we have experiments also. I will conclude with this one, that there is a notion when a master or the teacher or the supervisor thinks their subjects will perform and they are performing. That is psychologically, they have evidences, which is one teacher presented in 1960s in America with much resistance. And they conducted the experiment with two set of mice. That one set is given to one group and another set is given to another group. But when they are given to the particular group, second group, they told these mice were so trained to find the food. And after like couple of period, within a stipulated amount of time, the groups which got the mice, which was told that they were trained, were performing better. But in fact, both mice were not trained. This is the same attitude that we are seeing everywhere. The teachers or the supervisors or the managers or the group or the voluntary, non-voluntary organization, same response. I will conclude with another testimony in AKSC. One non-Brahmin friend called community, Tamil community organization in Bay Area, where the other side of the person happened to be a Brahmin. And during the conversation, the other end, the person the other end who is a Brahmin said Namaskaram. It's a Brahminical way of greeting. And the girl at the other end said Vanakkam. That is the Tamil way of saying. Then immediately the tone and the response from the other side changed. And they are software engineers. So true, there is a class issue, there is a gender issue, but it should not obscure the most deepened problem. It has to complement and bring the forces together rather than canceling each other.
Like let's have the authors conclude.
Yeah,
We are
conclusion. Yeah, sorry.
already 30 minutes over. So over to you, Joel and Satya.
Thank you very much for organizing this. So the idea is also we just want to bring it into light. There is such kind of writing, and there is this new book, and people should know about it. And we are very sorry that the US price of the book is so high. We could negotiate with these global publishers and so on. So the Indian edition is slightly less, and we're hoping that they would bring the paperback. I think if you want to discuss it further, you can have it in smaller groups, and also you can have a discussion with other activists and scholars reading the book and so on, not necessarily with the others. But the point is that this is an issue, this is a problem that needs to be discussed. And also, as I was suggesting, that if you can think of documenting the experiences of Dalits in the US context, in the tech industry and so on. Not necessarily when something erupts as a case, like the Cisco case or something, but in everyday life in the US, now that you are a big community, you have AKSC, whether you could actually document those experiences of, discrimination in life and so on. So that will also be very good as the community, the Indian community, and as well as the Dalit community is growing in the Indian context. So our idea is very kind of limited, that some of these narratives and discussions might give us some ideas and concepts to deal with these everyday life situation. And if that serves the purpose in any limited way, and we are happy with that. Thank you. Thank you all again.
Yes, thanks so much for the invitation, and I would just second that what Satya was saying, that to do sort of an oral history project where you interview people who may be negotiating this kind of thing on a daily basis, that could be such a tremendous contribution. But yeah, it's been terrific having this conversation, and I hope it'll be the first of many such conversations. And again, very, very grateful for to meet everyone and have this opportunity. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you again, professors. Thank you all the participants who stayed for a long time. Have a good evening.